Hello! Welcome. Welcome. Sunday night, Monday morning, Monday afternoon. It's a time zone for you.
At 11 a.m., I opened our bedroom door. My fiancé was in bed, with a man I'd never seen before. Then he asked who I was. I hadn't planned to be home that morning. My schedule was tight, back-to-back meetings at the office, but a last-minute cancellation freed up a few hours. I decided I'd surprise Sophie with lunch from her favorite bakery, the kind of little gesture I thought still meant something. I remember holding the warm paper bag in my hand as I walked up the stairs, already picturing her sleepy smile when I opened the bedroom door. The apartment was quiet. No TV in the background, no hum from her laptop. She'd said she was working from home, but even the office chair in the living room was pushed aside like it hadn't been used all morning. A faint sound came from the bedroom, low voices, muffled, almost like laughter. At first I thought she might be on a call, but the tone wasn't professional. I turned the handle and stepped inside. Sophie was in bed, tangled in the sheets with a man I had never seen before. The sunlight from the window cut across them like a spotlight, and for a few seconds neither of them moved. She froze, her eyes wide, mouth opening like she was about to say something, but no sound came out. He just propped himself on one elbow, looked at me calmly, and asked who I was. It was such a bizarre thing to hear that my brain didn't process it immediately. The question wasn't defensive, wasn't aggressive, just flat curiosity. And that's when I realized he genuinely didn't know. The bag with the pastries hit the floor. I moved to the bed, grabbed him by the forearm, and yanked him upright before he could react. He stumbled, clutching the sheet to his waist, still asking what was going on. Sophie shot off the mattress, yelling for me to stop. My grip on him tightened. I wasn't shouting, but my voice was sharp enough to slice through the room. I told him to get dressed and get out. He pulled on his jeans and t-shirt with shaking hands, his eyes flicking between me and Sophie, as if waiting for one of us to tell him this was some kind of prank. Sophie's voice wavered as she told me I was overreacting, that this wasn't what it looked like. She stepped toward me, but I pointed to the door and told her to stand back. When he moved toward the hallway, I followed him. I didn't care that I was half blocking the exit with my body. I wanted to see exactly how he'd leave, wanted to watch his face as it dawned on him that he'd walked straight into someone else's home. On his way out, he muttered that he didn't know she was engaged, that he wouldn't have come if he'd known. I didn't answer, just slammed the door behind him and locked it. Sophie was standing in the kitchen when I came back. She was flushed, not from guilt, but from the adrenaline of being caught. She said it was a stupid mistake, that they had only been talking for a couple of weeks, that it just happened. I didn't reply. I leaned on the counter, watching her scramble for explanations, each one weaker than the last. Her phone, face down on the counter, buzzed. Once, twice, then again. I flipped it over. His name was on the screen. She snatched it from my hand, but I'd already seen enough. Whatever she told him after he left wasn't an apology for crossing a line. She was trying to salvage something. I opened the door and told her to leave. She started to cry, saying we could work it out, but when I repeated myself, she grabbed her bag and walked past me. No shoes, just socks. She stood outside for a moment, looking back like she expected me to call her in. I didn't. The apartment was silent again, but it didn't feel like my place anymore. I walked into the bedroom and took in the scene. The sheets twisted into knots, the faint smell of cologne I didn't recognize, the indentation on the pillow that wasn't mine. I sat on the edge of the bed for a few minutes, not because I was tired, but because I needed to think without moving. My first instinct was to text her family and tell them everything. Her parents adored me, or at least they pretended to. But something stopped me. The look on the guy's face when he asked who I was had lodged itself in my head. He wasn't smug, wasn't defensive, he was confused. That meant she'd lied to him too. I replayed the moment he walked past me toward the door. The gym bag on his shoulder had a logo I knew, a local fitness club down by the waterfront. I'd been there once for a corporate event. It wasn't the kind of place you just wandered into. You had to be a member or work there. If he did work there, maybe there was more to this than a random hookup. I found my laptop, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled up the club's public site. No mention of his name on the staff page, but the members' Facebook group was wide open. I scrolled through tagged photos from events and found him in one from a few weeks ago, standing behind a reception counter in gym gear, smiling with a group of people holding water bottles. A caption under the picture mentioned his first name. I had it now, and knowing his first name meant I could search deeper. I didn't call Sophie. I didn't text the guy. I wanted to build a picture first, to see the shape of whatever this was before I tore it apart. My gut told me that if I acted too soon, I'd only hear more half-truths. I checked my own calendar, flipping through the past few weeks. Twice she'd told me she was working late, when I knew for a fact her company had been on half-days. Once she'd said she was with her sister, But her sister had called me that same evening about something unrelated and never mentioned being with Sophie. These were the nights she was with him. By the time the clock hit 1 in the afternoon, I'd pieced together enough to know this wasn't a one-off. She hadn't slipped once in a moment of bad judgment. She'd built a side life, one where I didn't exist. The lunch I'd brought home had gone cold. I tossed it in the trash and sat back down, scrolling through my phone. I found his Instagram, set to public. Every few days he posted from the same apartment. Not my apartment, but the decor was familiar. Sophie's throw blanket on the couch, a framed print I'd helped her hang last spring. She'd been living in 2 spaces, shifting between them depending on whose bed she wanted that night. The immediate anger from the confrontation was cooling into something sharper. This wasn't just betrayal. This was deliberate, sustained deception. And if she could lie that easily to both of us, there was no telling what else she was hiding. I leaned back, considering my options. She'd be expecting me to stew for a while, maybe call her in a few days to talk it out. She'd expect me to either explode again or pretend to forgive her so the wedding could still happen. What she wouldn't expect was patience. Patience meant I could find every crack in her story before I forced her to face it again. Patience meant I could make sure that when the next confrontation happened, there would be no escape, no way for her to twist the truth. For now, I only had one clear decision. I wasn't going to give her the chance to get ahead of me. That morning had started with me thinking I was about to hand Sophie lunch and a smile. By midday, I'd thrown a stranger out of my bedroom, kicked my fiancée into the hallway, and started mapping the route to her second life. And the strangest part? I knew this was just the surface. Whatever came next would be bigger and messier. The apartment felt heavier after Sophie left, like the air itself had absorbed what happened. I wasn't just dealing with betrayal. I was dealing with something planned, sustained, and carefully hidden. The man's confusion that morning had been genuine, which meant Sophie had been lying to both of us. That made it worse. She wasn't just cheating. She was running parallel lives and managing both well enough to keep us unaware of each other. The bag from the bakery was still in the trash. I pushed it deeper under other waste, not because I couldn't stand to see it, but because I didn't want anything in my home reminding me of how close I'd come to walking in, kissing her on the forehead, and never knowing. The logo on his gym bag stayed in my mind. It wasn't a chain. It was an independent club in the waterfront district, a place where I'd once attended a corporate wellness event. That meant he either worked there or spent enough time there to treat it like home. My earlier search had already shown a group photo with him behind a reception desk. That was enough to confirm employment. I opened a new browser tab and dug through tagged photos from the club's public events. He appeared often, sometimes in workout gear, sometimes in casual clothing, always looking like he belonged there. His name came up in comments more than once, usually from members thanking him for a session or a program. I made a note of the dates. A pattern began to emerge. Every time Sophie had claimed to be working from home, in the last 2 months lined up with days he'd been tagged at the club during off-peak hours. Next, I turned to Sophie's online presence. She kept her accounts locked down, but mutual friends occasionally tagged her in group photos. In one of them, taken at a rooftop bar 3 weeks ago, she was wearing the same leather jacket I'd seen draped over the chair in his Instagram post from earlier this month. That wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't enough to simply have proof of physical cheating. I wanted to understand how deep the deception went. This wasn't about catching her in one act anymore. It was about seeing how much of the life she had with me was built on lies. I called an old friend, Alex, who worked in IT security. He owed me a favor from a project I'd helped him with the previous year. I explained that I suspected Sophie was hiding another apartment and asked if there was a way to verify her location history from her cloud backups. He told me it was possible if her account synced from her phone and laptop, both of which I knew it did. He said he'd look into it and call me back within the day. While waiting, I went back over what I already knew. The man had no idea she was engaged, which meant she'd been presenting herself as single to him. But what did she tell him she did for a living? Did she give him her real name? If she was smart enough to run 2 relationships without overlap, maybe she'd even created a fake identity. I needed to talk to him, but not yet. Not without knowing exactly what I was walking into. By late afternoon, Alex called back. He had pulled location history from the past 6 months and highlighted repeated visits to a single address in a different part of the city. The visits were frequent, often lasting overnight, and always during days she'd told me she was with friends or working late. I entered the address into a property listing site and saw it was a small furnished apartment rented under a different first name, but the surname matched Sophie's. It was a short-term lease, renewed 3 months ago. That meant she'd been maintaining this second residence while planning our wedding. The picture became clearer. The man from my bedroom wasn't a one-night mistake. He was part of a double life Sophie had been funding and managing with precision. The only reason it had collapsed was because I came home unexpectedly. That thought changed my approach. If she could juggle two lives for months, she could just as easily pivot now, spin a narrative, and salvage one of them. If I confronted her again without strategy, she might twist the story to make herself the victim. I needed to get ahead of her. I decided to watch the apartment before making a move. The next morning, I drove out early and parked in a cafe across the street, facing the building. An hour later, Sophie appeared, dressed casually, carrying a tote bag I recognized from her closet. She wasn't alone. The man from my bedroom was walking beside her, holding a coffee for her. They looked relaxed, like they'd done this many times. They walked toward the parking lot, and I noted the direction they went. 15 minutes later, I saw them returning together. This wasn't the awkwardness of two people caught and avoiding each other. If anything, they seemed closer, like being discovered had somehow solidified their bond. That detail told me something important. Sophie hadn't told him the truth about who I was. She might have claimed I was an ex, a roommate, or someone else entirely. If that was the case, he might still be in the dark, and that ignorance could be used. 2 days later, I made my move. I went to the gym where he worked, dressed like any other prospective member. I asked about personal training sessions, and the receptionist called him over. He introduced himself with the same name I'd seen in the tags. He was polite, professional, and had no idea who I was. While discussing training options, I slipped in a remark about having a fiancé who'd been thinking about joining. He nodded and said the club had great couple packages, no flicker of recognition in his face. It was confirmed. Sophie had never told him she was engaged. That gave me leverage. If he was as in the dark as he seemed, he'd be furious at being lied to, and more willing to work with me than against me. I didn't confront him right there in the gym. That would have been sloppy. Instead, I left with a business card and a plan to contact him on my terms. When I got home, I drafted a message explaining everything. Who I was, how long I'd been with Sophie, how she'd been maintaining 2 relationships. I attached screenshots of our engagement announcement and photos of us together, timestamped to prove the overlap. Then I waited. He responded within an hour. The tone wasn't offensive, it was sharp, almost stunned. He asked for a call, and when we spoke, he confirmed that Sophie had told him she was single, living alone, and casually dating. She'd never mentioned me. He also said he'd been spending nights at that second apartment regularly and had no idea it wasn't her only home. The anger in his voice wasn't just about betrayal. It was about being played for a fool. I could hear the shift as he realized she'd been managing both of us like pieces on a board. That's when I suggested meeting in person to discuss what to do next. He agreed without hesitation. We met in a quiet coffee shop the following afternoon. He brought his own proof, text threads, photos, and details of plans they'd made for the future. It was surreal seeing the same kind of relationship milestones I'd shared with her, duplicated and repackaged for someone else. We both sat there, comparing notes, building a shared timeline that covered months of deception. By the time we left, we had a plan. He would invite her to meet him at a restaurant under the pretense of talking things through. I would be there, seated at the table when she arrived. We wouldn't ambush her with shouting or chaos. We'd dismantle her narrative piece by piece, in a place where she couldn't simply walk away without making a scene. The trap was set. Now it was just a matter of timing. The night before the meeting, I went through the evidence one more time. It wasn't just about proving the affair. It was about showing her that every lie had been uncovered, that every version of the truth she thought she controlled was now in someone else's hands. This wasn't going to be an argument she could talk her way out of. It was going to be the moment her 2 lives collided in front of an audience she couldn't control, and I was ready to watch it happen. The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon. The man, Ryan, chose the restaurant, a small, modern place on the edge of the city center where he said Sophie would feel comfortable enough to drop her guard. It was public enough to keep her from storming out without questions, but quiet enough that the conversation could cut deep without outsiders leaning in. I kept my role hidden. She would believe she was meeting him alone to clear the air. Ryan sent her the message himself, careful to use the same tone he'd always used with her, light, personal, with a hint of vulnerability. He told me she replied quickly, suggesting the time, and even joking about ordering their usual appetizer. That told me 2 things. She wasn't nervous about seeing him again, and she still thought she controlled the situation. 2 days before the meeting, I started laying groundwork that would keep her from recovering afterward. I reached out to 3 mutual friends who had no idea what had happened. I didn't tell them every detail yet. I only told them there was something they needed to witness. They were curious, suspicious, but they agreed to be at the restaurant at the same time, seated nearby. If things went the way I expected, they would leave with their own version of events, and those versions would spread. On Friday night, I printed everything. Photos of Sophie and me from our engagement party, screenshots of her messages to me about wedding plans, receipts from the short-term apartment lease, and the property listing with her surname on it. I added stills from Ryan's Instagram that showed my belongings in her other apartment, a blanket, a framed print, even a mug I'd given her as a joke last Christmas. I put everything in a neat folder and slipped it into my bag. The morning of the meeting, I kept busy. I didn't want to give myself time to imagine every way it could play out. There were too many variables: Sophie's reactions, Ryan's tone, the way the friends might respond. But one thing was certain: she wouldn't be walking out of there with her reputation intact. Ryan and I agreed to arrive early. I got there first, taking a seat at a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. Ryan came in 5 minutes later, dressed casually, carrying nothing but his phone. We didn't shake hands. We just nodded, both of us focused on the fact that within an hour, the double life she'd built was going to collapse in public. Sophie arrived exactly on time, her pace confident as she crossed the street. She was dressed in the kind of casual elegance she reserved for people she wanted to impress. A tailored coat, hair pinned back just enough to show she'd made an effort without looking like she was trying too hard. She spotted Ryan first, smiled, and then her eyes slid to me. The smile froze. Her stride faltered, but she didn't stop. She reached the table, looked between us, and asked why I was there. I didn't answer. Ryan gestured to the empty chair across from us, and she sat slowly, still trying to read the situation. I could see her mind working. She was calculating whether to be defensive, apologetic, or amused. Her gaze kept flicking to the friends seated 2 tables away. She recognized them, though she didn't yet know they were there for me. Ryan started the conversation. His voice was calm, but carried enough weight to make her sit straighter. He told her he had learned about me, that she'd been lying to him from the start, and that the morning in my bedroom hadn't been a misunderstanding. It had been the final proof of a long-running deception. Her face didn't crumble or redden. Instead, it hardened. She tried to insist it wasn't that simple, that we were both misreading things. That was my cue. I slid the folder onto the table and opened it so she could see the stack of documents and photos. One by one, I laid them out. The apartment lease, the photos of my belongings in her second place, the overlapping date stamps from her trips between our home and Ryan's bed. Each piece of evidence was like another nail in the coffin of whatever story she was trying to salvage. She reached for one of the pages, but I pulled it back. The point wasn't to let her touch it. It was to let her see it, and to know it would never be in her control again. Ryan added his own contribution, pulling up text threads on his phone where she described herself as single, mocked the idea of marriage, and told him she was only seeing where things go. The words hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just betrayal, it was contempt for both of us. She had been running 2 relationships not because she was torn or confused, but because she enjoyed having the power to choose day by day which life she wanted to inhabit. Her first real crack came when she realized the people at the nearby table weren't strangers. One of them caught her eye and quickly looked away, and I saw the panic start to bloom in her expression. She knew then that this conversation wasn't contained, that there would be ripples she couldn't stop. She tried to regain control, leaning back in her chair and attempting a tone of detached irritation. She claimed I was making a scene out of jealousy, that Ryan was overreacting because he'd been misled by rumors. But Ryan cut her off, telling her exactly how he'd learned the truth, how we'd met in the cafe, how we'd built the timeline together. The sequence of events left her no room to twist the facts. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Every detail was laid out plainly, and the weight of the silence between points made her shift in her seat. She looked for an exit strategy, scanning the room, glancing at her phone as if an urgent message might save her. Nothing came. The turning point was when Ryan mentioned the second apartment by address. That piece of information wasn't in any of the public evidence. Only she would know it was real. Her eyes snapped to him, and for a brief second, the mask dropped. That was the moment she understood there was no gap in what we knew. The rest was just watching her crumble in slow motion. She didn't cry, didn't beg. She just ran out of options. The friends at the other table stayed seated, but I knew they were listening. The staff kept their distance, sensing the tension but not wanting to intervene. When the conversation was over, I gathered the documents, slid them back into the folder, and told her the wedding was off. I said it without emphasis, like stating the time of day, because by then, it wasn't a decision, it was a conclusion. Ryan stood when I did, leaving her alone at the table. She didn't follow us out. She stayed seated, staring at the table, while the quiet murmurs of the nearby diners filled the air. Whatever story she told herself about controlling the narrative had just dissolved in front of witnesses. Outside, Ryan and I didn't linger. We exchanged a brief acknowledgement before heading in opposite directions. We weren't friends, and we didn't need to be. What connected us was over, and so was she. Back at my place, I opened my email and sent copies of the evidence to her parents. I didn't add commentary, Just attach the files with the subject line, "You should see this," before hearing it from someone else. Less than an hour later, her father called. I let it ring out. The messages from Sophie started later that night. First there were claims that I'd embarrassed her unnecessarily, then attempts at bargaining, then sudden silence. I ignored them all. The damage wasn't reversible, and the point of the meeting hadn't been to talk. It had been to end things in a way that left no room for revision. By midnight, I knew she'd start feeling the social blowback. The friends who'd witnessed the confrontation would already be telling others, and those stories would carry more weight than anything she tried to spin privately. The more she tried to defend herself, the more those details would surface. The second confrontation had been cleaner than the first. No shouting, no scrambling, no slammed doors. Just the slow, deliberate dismantling of her version of events until all that was left was the truth, sitting in front of her for everyone to see. And the real fallout was still ahead. The hours after the restaurant meeting passed quietly, but it was the kind of quiet that feels loaded. I didn't hear from Sophie directly beyond a few scattered messages, but I didn't expect her to stop trying. People like her didn't just fade away when caught. They circled back, hoping to find one angle still under their control. I wasn't going to give her one. By Sunday morning, the messages had shifted from defensive to pleading. She wanted to meet privately to explain and suggested we could still salvage something. I didn't answer. I knew every word was calculated, not out of remorse, but out of fear. The wedding was weeks away. Vendors, guests, family, all of them were about to hear exactly why there wouldn't be a ceremony. She was scrambling to contain it before it became public. She didn't realize it already had. The three friends who'd witnessed the confrontation didn't wait to share what they'd seen. I started getting texts from people I hadn't spoken to in months. Some were just checking in, others asking if the rumors were true. I didn't give long explanations. I told them the wedding was off, and that the reason would be clear soon enough. That afternoon, I started dismantling the wedding logistics. I called the venue first, explaining that the booking was canceled due to the bride's infidelity. The manager hesitated, not because he doubted me, but because he didn't want to get involved in personal disputes. I offered to forward documents proving it, including her name on the short-term lease and photos of her with Ryan in that apartment. By the time the call ended, the venue had removed her name from all paperwork and confirmed that any refund would go solely to me. Next were the vendors: catering, photography, flowers, transportation. I handled each call the same way: calm, clear, and backed by proof if they wanted it. A few tried to hide their shock, others didn't bother. By the end of the day, every booking was canceled or transferred under my name. In practical terms, she no longer had a wedding to attend, even if she wanted to pretend one still existed. Her parents called again that evening. This time I answered. Her father's tone was clipped, formal, as if speaking to a business associate instead of the man who was supposed to marry his daughter. He said they'd spoken to her and heard conflicting accounts about what had happened. I told him there was no conflict, only evidence. Then I sent him the same folder I'd shown her in the restaurant, complete with timestamps, the lease, and Ryan's statement. 5 minutes later, I got a single text from her mother. "We're deeply disappointed in her. Take care of yourself." No offers to mediate. No attempts to soften it. Just the acknowledgement that their daughter had burned the bridge. I knew she'd try to recover her footing socially, so I moved faster. I sent a short message to our entire wedding guest list. "The wedding is canceled due to Sophie's actions. I appreciate your understanding. Attached are the details for any refunds if you've booked travel or accommodations." I left it at that. No added drama, no name calling. The simplicity made it harder for her to claim I was exaggerating. By Monday morning, Ryan texted me saying she'd shown up at his gym unannounced. She'd tried to corner him between sessions, demanding to know why he'd humiliated her. According to him, she left when he told her their conversations were over for good. Later that day, the gym's management decided she was no longer welcome as a member. That cut off one of her regular haunts and removed her excuse to linger around him. The next blow came from the lease on her second apartment. My friend Alex had passed me the contact information for the landlord. I called him, explained that I was an interested third party and that the tenant might soon default on payments. He was blunt. The lease had been paid month to month, and there were no penalties for ending it early. By Wednesday, the listing was live again, which meant she'd lost her hideaway. Her social media began to shift. Posts disappeared. Photos with me vanished first, then group shots that included Ryan. It was the digital equivalent of scrubbing a crime scene, but the effort was pointless. Enough people had screenshots, and the stories circulating were already cementing her image in our shared circles. Every edit just made it more obvious she was trying to rewrite the past. I didn't block her number immediately. I wanted to see if she'd make one last desperate play. It came on Thursday evening. She called 3 times in a row before leaving a voicemail. Her voice was a strange mix of anger and desperation. She accused me of overreacting, of conspiring with Ryan to trap her, of ruining her life over something that didn't have to be a big deal. Then she said I'd regret making enemies where I could have made peace. That last line told me she still didn't get it. She thought this was a fight she could outlast or twist into her favor. So I blocked her. The silence after that was immediate and final. But the ripple effects kept going. 2 mutual friends told me she'd been uninvited from a bachelorette weekend she was supposed to attend for someone else. The bride had heard what happened and didn't want that kind of energy near her wedding. Another friend mentioned Sophie had tried to meet with a vendor we'd booked, hoping to salvage part of the original arrangements for a smaller event. The vendor refused, citing my name on the contracts. Ryan and I didn't speak again after the restaurant, but word reached me that he'd been clear with his own circle about why things ended. She lost that group too. Whatever network she'd built to maintain her second life was collapsing as fast as the first. By the weekend, the damage was complete. She no longer had the wedding, the venue, the apartment, or the man she'd used to split her time. Her family had pulled back, her social standing was gutted, and the only narrative left in circulation was the one Ryan and I had built with evidence. Every conversation she tried to start about it was met with skepticism or outright dismissal. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no victory lap to take. What I felt was finality, the kind that comes when every loose end is tied off and there's nothing left to revisit. She had gambled on managing 2 realities indefinitely, and the moment they collided, the fallout was swift and irreversible. On Sunday night, a week after walking in on her in my bedroom, I sat at the same kitchen table where I'd first looked up the gym's Facebook page. The bakery bag was gone, the sheets had been replaced, and the last traces of her in my apartment were boxed in the corner, ready to be dropped at her parents' place. I sent one final email to her father, letting him know the belongings were ready for collection. He replied with a simple acknowledgement. That was the end. Not a dramatic scene, not a final showdown, just the quiet certainty that I'd closed the door for good. The path to get there hadn't been clean. The first confrontation had been raw and chaotic. The second had been calculated and public. But both had done their work, and together, they'd made sure there was no version of events where Sophie came out untouched. And in that quiet, I realized something important. Sometimes the most decisive revenge isn't about shouting louder than the other person. It's about making sure they have no place left to stand. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.